Senator, thank you for being here. I worked in the executive branch, and I was thinking about it today. The longer I served and the more senior I became, the more intense the background check into me became. And the more clearances I was required to have to do my job, the more scrutiny and the deeper the background check and the farther back they went in terms of years to see if I was suited for that job. The more transparency that was asked of me, you know, the longer I served and the farther up the chain I went. It is the inverse in the judiciary, especially where the Supreme Court is concerned. How much of laying out these facts is part of the public education piece to make sure that the public understands one of these things is not like the other?
Yeah, Nicole, you bring up a great point, and thank you for having me. It's actually a theme that I tried to raise in Judiciary Committee this morning. There's, I think, an assumption by the general public that these ethics laws, these transparency and disclosure rules do apply to Supreme Court justices, when in fact they do not. The President of the United States, administration officials, you're an example. I know members of Congress, elected officials at all levels of government have these binding, enforceable ethics laws, financial disclosure requirements, etc. And you would assume that they apply to the highest court in the land. But we find ourselves in a situation where the highest court in the land is trying to abide by the lowest ethical standards, and that's what we're trying to correct here.
Chief Justice Roberts rebuffed, is that the nicest way to put it, the committee's invitation. Have you reached out to any of the other justices?
Look, I have through twofold. One, the chairmanship and leadership of Senator Durbin, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee. I think Senate Democrats on the Judiciary Committee stand behind his efforts. If it's not to get Justice Thomas to come to the committee, Chief Justice Roberts to answer these very important questions, and because of his refusal, then we have to take these other options. It's just the latest example of a Supreme Court that refuses to regulate itself, to police itself, and put in place these minimum common sense ethics requirements that the general public deserves. And let's be clear here. You put up a couple of statistics about the public perception or confidence or lack thereof in the Supreme Court, whether it's official ethics violations or just the perception of bad activity. That's not good for the Supreme Court, not good for the judiciary, not good for the federal government in general, and needs to be addressed. It's already bad enough when the Supreme Court makes it easier for wealthy people to influence the outcome of elections, and makes it harder for working class people to vote. But when every other important issue works its way up to the Supreme Court, from environmental protection to immigration to choice and access to reproductive services, confidence in the decisions by the Supreme Court is paramount.
Would you like to see Harlan Crow before the committee answering questions?
There's a whole lot of people, starting with Harlan Crow, that need to answer questions. You made reference earlier to how partisan some of the discussion in committee was. Just ask yourself this: how would Republican members of the Senate be reacting if the reported conduct that we've been reading about was by a justice that had been appointed by a Democratic president? Right? So it's not the who appointed a justice that's in question here. It is the conduct, whether it was a justice appointed by a Democratic or Republican president. It's the conduct that is unacceptable.
Let me show you what your colleague, Senator Blumenthal, had to say about that.
The public confidence in the United States Supreme Court has plummeted. We can go back and forth as to what the cause is, but a lot of the American public are increasingly seeing the justices as politicians in robes, and now, after the revelations about Justice Thomas, as corrupt politicians in robes. They want an investigation. They want the truth. It should be done by the Department of Justice, because there are allegations of criminal wrongdoing here, violations by Justice Thomas of the disclosure laws, incomplete, inaccurate reporting, as well as non-disclosure. And in the absence of an investigation by the Department of Justice, we have a role to play in Congress. But the judges have a role to play, too, in protecting themselves. And what Chief Justice Roberts has done in refusing to come before this committee is judicial malpractice.
It seems like he's putting this in a couple of different buckets. One is what we've been talking about, the lack of an ethics code that is on par with what you have to do as a senator, on par with what people serving the executive branch, anyone in the cabinet, on down to staffers like I was. But the second is these disclosure violations, which the senator alleges may be violations of law. Are you considering a criminal referral to the Justice Department to investigate that?
Well, again, I think there needs to be consequences, but to get to those appropriate consequences, there needs to be an investigation. And so the report that's been done through the press it shows that there's more than smoke there. Mm-hmm. But whether it's the Supreme Court themselves, and they're obviously refusing to hold themselves to account, or the Department of Justice, as Senator Blumenthal referenced, if not, then Congress has a role to play. Absolutely.